up, everyone? Sara here to share with you some information on why our brains are important for speech and language production. So today we're going to be talking about the four main lobes of the brain. The frontal lobe here is in green, the parietal lobe is in blue, the occipital lobe here is in red, and down here is the temporal lobe in yellow. There's a couple landmarks here I want to point out with the tags. We have the parieto-occipital sulcus back here between the red and the blue lobes. And we have up here the central fissure dividing the frontal from the parietal lobes. So you can see that goes all the way down to pretty much where the temporal lobe is down here. And then we have the lateral sulcus here between the frontal and the temporal lobes and also the parietal. So the lateral sulcus goes this way, the central fissure is here. I'm going to take these tags out and then we're going to talk about why I have so many stars on the brain. Be right back. So here's the brain without the tags. It's a little bit cleaner to look at. And you might be asking yourself, hey, this is the left side of the brain. Where's the right side of the brain? I'm glad you asked. This is the left side of the brain because the left side is much more involved with our speech and language production and comprehension. However, the right side does play a little bit of a role. So real quick, I want to talk about the different sides of the brain and what they're responsible for. So as I said, this is the left side of the brain. It's more involved with speaking, reading, writing, listening, number skills, grammar, analyzing information, logic, sequential thinking, being aware of time, and also, please note, it does control the right side of your body. So if you have an injury on the left side of your brain, this is my left, I'm going to notice problems on the right side of my body. So people may have right side neglect or right side weakness if the injury, lesion, stroke, whatever happened on the left side. So if you have an injury on the left side of your brain, you may have difficulty understanding spoken and written language. You may have trouble expressing your thoughts. You have change in your speech. You may have verbal memory issues, impaired logic, and problems with sequencing. Now on the right side, this is my right side over here. If I have an injury here on the right side, it's going to affect my left side. I may have neglect or weakness or really tense on the left side of my body. And so the right side...
I think you are asking for the song My Body, Your Body. Is that right?
Alexa, stop. So the right side of my body, the right side of my brain is good at organizing information. It's good at finding abstract meanings in things, context, spatial relationships, like being able to read a map. I cannot read a map. That must be because I have a right side problem. Receiving visual information, facial recognition, intuition. Now that's something I actually excel in personally. Emotion, imagination, yeah, that's me too. Detecting motion and music and art, that's what I love. And as I said, the right side does control the left side of the body. So one of these sides you're probably going to be dominant on. I can tell you, I think I'm right side dominant. My husband is left side dominant, so we balance each other out. Injuries to the right side of the brain. If I have a stroke on the right side, I may have problems with attention. I may have memory issues more so. I may have awareness deficits. I may kind of lose my ability to see the whole big picture of things, and I wouldn't be able to appreciate music and art the way that I do now currently. So moving on with our left-sided brain. So as I said, the left side specializes in language and speech production and understanding. So we're going to focus on the left side for right now, and I'm going to dial in here onto the frontal lobe, so the green part here. So in general terms, the frontal lobe here, the green lobe at the front of my brain, so this is the front of my brain, the frontal lobe is just, it's so important for IQ, for motor planning, for processing emotions. So it's a very bad lobe to get a stroke in. If you were going to have a stroke, I would not choose the frontal lobe. So number 1, the first star up here is number 1. That small little star on the front side, that is the superior frontal gyrus. So if I have an injury or a lesion here of the superior frontal gyrus, I may have issues with higher cognitive functions and working memory, attention control, and language production comprehension issues up here. The middle frontal gyrus is number 2, this star right here. Hopefully you can see that. So this is more just for literacy and word reading. I'm sure it does more, but we'll just say that for now. Number 3 is down here, and the inferior frontal gyrus, if there's an injury there, you're going to have issues with processing spoken language. And then number 4 is kind of very close to the number 3 right there, so number 4. And that's kind of bordering on the temporal lobe there, and it's also very close to Broca's area. There's a lot of stuff that goes on right in this area. You can tell there's a lot of stars. Number 4 is the frontal operculum, and as I said, it's closely related to Broca's area. So I may have verbal apraxia, so issues with speaking. So that just means like not organized motor patterns with speaking. So issues with words coming out of my mouth. Number 5, so right there, non-fluent aphasia. That's Broca's area. So if you have an issue there, that's a bad place to get a stroke, because now you're going to have problems with producing language, either in spoken, manual, or written form. But I would still be able to comprehend what's being told to me. So I would understand if my husband says, hey, put milk on the grocery list, but I wouldn't be able to actually write milk down on the grocery list. It might just look like garbly-gook or something. Here, if you have a lesion here, speech motor planning problems happen. So like it's very effortful to even speak anything. So if I had a lesion here and someone said, what's your name? I might sound like, and so they'd have to help me. I probably wouldn't be able to say my name right away. Number 6, if I had a problem there, that's also a bad spot. This is the frontal parietal operculum. So this area is involved with taste discrimination and somatosensory and motor function. And then number 7 is it's up here. So the precentral gyrus, aka this is the motor strip here, so you can see I made this little wiggly line here. Then it goes all the way down. This is the precentral gyrus. I can't speak. Precentral gyrus. This is the area where we initiate voluntary motor movement. So if there's a problem along this strip anywhere, you're going to have some muscle weakness or partial paralysis there in that affected area. And so as the motor strip comes down, it kind of connects into this Broca's area. So there's a homunculus. I'll put a picture here, a graphic on the video. The homunculus, as we come down into this area, it is like the larynx and the mouth and the lips and all of that is where the homunculus incorporates with the Broca. Lobe is the parietal lobe, and that's the blue one here, kind of in the middle part of my brain. And this lobe has more to do with processing somatosensory information and correlating incoming signals from the body. Like, I'm able to reach into my purse and know where my chapstick is because I know how it feels, but I'm not using my eyes or any other real sense. I know how it feels and where to find it using the parietal lobe of my brain. And there's a couple stars here. There's not a lot of stars on the parietal lobe. As you can see, it's somewhat involved with speech and language, but not as much as like the temporal and the frontal lobes over here. The parietal lobe has a couple important areas for speech and language. So let's talk about this one here, this is number 8, kind of close to the occipital lobe. This is where we incorporate and integrate visual, auditory, and somatic information. All kind of converges and comes together in this area. And this is the inferior parietal lobule right there. And then number 9 is here. This is the superior parietal lobule. And so if we have a problem here, we're going to have hemispatial neglect possibly. And this may also affect your working memory. Number 10 is there. This is the post-central gyrus. So it's kind of close to the precentral gyrus that we talked about earlier. The post-central gyrus, if you have an issue on this line, you're going to have issues with somatosensory disturbances, especially like in tactile localization discrimination. So I might not be able to find the chapstick in the bottom of my purse if I have a problem in that specific area. Number 11 down here is the supramarginal gyrus. So in this area, in humans, it's different than in animals, or so our book says. In this area, it's different than in animals. In humans, we use this area for phonological processing, and it helps us to understand like postures and gestures with other people. And then 12 is right next door. This is the angular gyrus. This is a pretty important spot for receiving input from visual and auditory centers, as well as somatosensory information from the parietal lobe. I'm reading a little bit. And this area also helps in mathematical calculations and cognitive function. If there's an issue in this area, we may have receptive aphasia and reading problems. We may have dyslexia and dysgraphia, so we're not even able to write very well, and semantic processing problems. Semantic being like kind of like word usage and understanding. So the parietal lobe doesn't have a ton of super important areas, for speech and language, but it's very important more for like body position and somatosensory awareness. I have to say, I guess if I were going to have to choose a lobe to get a stroke in, I guess it would probably be the parietal, but there's not really any good place to have an injury to your brain. Next up, we have the occipital lobe in red back here, and I only have 1 star on that as it pertains to speech and language. But the occipital lobe in general is very important for visual association, and if we have a problem in the occipital lobe, we may lose our sight. So even though it's way in the back side, as far away from my eyes as you can be, pretty much, it affects your visual field and visual association. So if you have a problem here, this is the calcarine sulcus, you may go cortically blind. So that's a bad spot to get an injury. To last but certainly not least, the temporal lobe here in yellow. It's kind of, as you look at it from the side, it's right pretty much kind of behind my ear. So the yellow area is right around the ear area of my skull. And in general, the temporal lobe specializes in auditory perception and information. So as you can imagine, that's very important for our speech and communication. So it's also interesting to note that the temporal lobe has a portion of it that specializes in smell, olfactory senses. The inferior temporal gyrus is number 14, way down here at the bottom. You can see that 14 is there. Issues with language and semantic memory processing, visual perception, and multimodal sensory integration. That's what you'd have issues with there. That's the inferior temporal gyrus. Number 15 is right above it. That's the middle temporal gyrus. And if you had an injury or a lesion there, you would have problems with language and semantic memory processing, visual perception, and multimodal sensory. So it's very much the same as the inferior temporal gyrus. They're very closely related. Number 16, kind of right above that. This is Heschel's gyrus, Heschel's area. Very important for our speech and language. So all incoming auditory information is projected into the Heschel's area. And lesions here might result in bilateral deafness, both sides. I wouldn't be able to hear and not comprehending incoming sounds. Also, it's kind of cool to note that if something were to drop over there in the kitchen, I would know where the sound is coming from because of Heschel's gyrus. It's a pretty cool little thing. Handy dandy. Number 17 is superior temporal gyrus, and this contains Wernicke's area. So Wernicke's area I have labeled number 18, so kind of close by, but superior temporal gyrus here contains Wernicke's area, and Wernicke's area is important for processing receptive language within your dominant hemisphere. So if you have a problem in this area, you may have aphasia, not being able to understand what people are telling you. So in my example earlier, if my husband said, "Hey, we need to add milk to the list," I wouldn't know what he said. It would sound like jargon to me. So, but I might be able to speak. Maybe okay, but my words probably wouldn't make sense coming out. So I may not struggle like with Broca's aphasia. It may not be so labored trying to speak, but my words probably wouldn't make sense. It'd be like, window, was she gonna go to the car? And her hand was there, and tree top, oh my gosh, the rope. So it wouldn't make sense, but it'd be fluent anyway. So Wernicke's area is number 18 here, and so receptive aphasia would be my issue with that. And then number 19 is the very last star I have to point out on my little brain map, and it is here. This is the temporal operculum, and this contains Heschel's gyrus, as we talked about earlier. So it's the primary auditory complex. Thanks for watching my video. If this was even mildly helpful for you, please make sure that you hit the like button down below, and please also feel free to check out my book on the Kreb cycle if anyone's struggling to understand the Kreb cycle because you are more of a right side brain like me and you prefer the creative way of learning. I wrote a book on the Kreb cycle written like a children's book, so it kind of helps you understand with illustrations in a very basic way what happens in the Kreb cycle. Thanks for watching, you guys. I'll include a link to this down below. Have a lovely rest of your day, and as always, keep using both sides of your brain.